Inside the Birds is back. What's going on, everybody? It's Geoff Mosher and Adam Caplan. And of course, we've got a special guest with us, a very familiar name for the Inside the Birds audience. We will get to him in a second. But this is going to be the start of a series that Adam and I have been talking about, where we're going to preview the NFC East teams. We did this last year. People liked it, so we're doing it again this year, except we're bringing our buddy, and you can see him if you're watching on the YouTube channel. He's right there. His name is Greg Cosell. You've seen him on our shows, on our Inside the Birds pregame show, many of our Inside the Birds podcasts in the past. So Greg, and of course, he was the star of Inside the Draft with Greg Cosell on the Inside the Birds platform, which everybody loves. So welcome back, Greg.
Thanks, Geoff. Good to be with you guys.
Great to be with you, too. We are going to start our four team series here with the Dallas Cowboys. We figured we would just get right to the start, the heated rivals of the Philadelphia Eagles. We'll talk about the Cowboys. We'll get into their scheme. We'll get into their new personnel, their old personnel. We'll break them down. Have you tell us what you saw on tape from them last year, because they were a very interesting team that went through a lot of ups and downs with their injuries and everything like that. So we'll get into that for this podcast. And then, of course, the next one, which will drop on Thursday, will be the Giants, and then we'll follow with Washington. Yeah, Washington will be Thursday. Then the Giants will be the next one, and then we'll finish it up with the Eagles. So that'll be all four. Greg, before we get into this, we always like to tell stories here on Inside the Birds, and Adam and I have kind of bored our listeners with our great athletic exploits of the past. I know you were a tremendous athlete in high school and in college, and I
don't know if I was tremendous.
Oh, tremendous. Look at you. You look at you right now. You look good. I bet you can go out there and dunk on me if we were on the basketball court.
Yeah,
Lord knows you dunked on me during the pregame show.
If it was an 8-foot hoop, I could, yeah.
Lord knows you dunked on me during the pregame show a few times last year. So give us, you played high school basketball in Queens against, who would you play against? Kareem Abdul-Jabbar?
Well, my claim to fame, and again, I guess the audience, there would have to be an older audience, Geoff, to remember this. My claim to fame in high school is I went to Francis Lewis High School in Queens, and I went head-to-head against Ernie Grunfeld, who at the time was at Forest Hills High School, and needless to say, he got the better of it.
All right, so Ernie gotcha. He would go up to be president of the Knicks during one of their better heydays, right? The 90s?
Well, he went to Tennessee and played with Bernard King. It was the Bernie and Ernie show.
That's right.
And then I think Ernie Grunfeld played in the NBA for, 12 or 13 years.
Yes.
I did not play in the NBA, Geoff.
That is true.
What is your finest basketball moment, though? You've had to have a great game that stands out or something of that nature, right?
Well, it's funny because I moved earlier this year, and I had a ton of boxes in my basement, and so I went through them because we were trying to figure out what to keep and what to throw out. And I saw all these articles they had kept from high school, where because there was, this was back in the day, Geoff, of newspapers. Do people still know what they are? Newspapers?
My kids use them to line the cages for their eggs. Yeah.
When they were morning newspapers and actually afternoon newspapers, believe it or not.
Yep.
And there was a paper in Queens. It was actually Queens and Long Island, called the Long Island Press. I don't know if you remember that, Geoff. It was quite a long time ago. And so I found, these articles I had kept where, we had won games in high school, and it would, and my closest friend was someone named Joel Green. He was our leading scorer, but it would always say something like, Joel Green led the Patriots. We were the Francis Lewis Patriots because Francis Lewis was a signer of the Declaration of Independence. So it was, Joel Green led the Patriots with 22 points, and Greg Cosell chipped in with 15, that kind of stuff. And I found a bunch of those articles. But I was actually, I guess you want me to talk about this. I always feel awkward talking about this, but I was actually a better baseball player in high school than I was a basketball player. So, because my junior year, I actually had a very good year, and I was the all-city shortstop in New York City, which was probably the highlight of my athletic career. And I remember receiving letters, because those were the days when you actually got things in the U.S. mail. And I remember receiving a lot of letters from Major League Baseball teams after my junior year in high school. And unfortunately, my senior year didn't work out quite as well. You don't play that many games, as you know, Geoff, in the Northeast in baseball. So if you have 3 or 4 games that aren't so great, your season, when you play 15 or 16 games, it's not quite as good. But I do remember my junior year in high school, because you start in February or March playing games. And we played one of our rivals, which was Cardozo High School, which was always really good in baseball. And I think our first game we played at their place, and it was 22 degrees. And it was a little nippy out there. It wasn't what you'd call baseball weather.
No, not hitting season.
And I remember we won, and so typical of coaches back in those days, the next day there was a sign in the athletic offices that said, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. Because we won, I think it was 4-2, and it was, I think, the coldest I've ever been in my life.
Nice.
You're standing out there. I mean, obviously baseball is not a sport where you're moving around.
Right. Of course.
Wow.
No. So
and you can only wear so much because you've got to wear a baseball uniform. So it's not like you can stand out there with a parka, Exactly. You're wearing your baseball uniform.
You didn't have like the hat, that the baseball
you have your
players
baseball
now wear.
Hat, but that's about it.
No, I mean the knit cap with the facial cutout that guys wear now.
No. And couldn't wear the earmuffs either,
No, you couldn't do that. All right. So what I've learned from this, there was Greg Cosell, the all-city shortstop from Queens, and just a few years later, there was Derek Jeter, the all-world shortstop in the Bronx, playing for the Yankees. So that's good stuff.
Yeah,
good
he was a little better than I was, I think.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Well, listen, there's one thing Adam and I know, Greg, and that's you have, much like us, you have retired off the field a long time
ago.
Right. But, and maybe you'll be like me and Adam, because we're winning now because we use Deal Dash, the online shopping platform that's actually fun. Deal Dash is the longest running penny auction website around. Is that too good to be true? You bet it is. We've seen a car go for $900, a brand new TV, less than $2. So don't be a loser. Stop paying full retail price for the things you want and get on Deal Dash. You go to dealdash.com or you download the app. And when you register, use that promo code ITB for a special offer for some bonus free bids. And now maybe we've got Greg Cosell on the Deal Dash bandwagon. All right, let's get into the podcast here. We're gonna break down the Dallas Cowboys the best we can, soup to nuts. What a weird season, right, Greg? Because if you think about just the big picture of it, and Adam, they started off like a house of fire offensively.
Yep.
Prescott was really, I think he was putting up some record numbers for a Cowboys quarterback. Then he had that really gruesome injury. And that was kind of it for the Dallas Cowboys season. Now, because the NFC East is so bad, they were in it for quite a while, but they were just not a very good team after Dak Prescott went down. So just to start you off, Greg, I mean, I know you've seen the tape. I mean, when they had Prescott, those first few games, they were really on cruise control offensively. What did you see what their offense was doing?
Well, the other thing, too, is they were not very good defensively.
Correct.
So there were games in which Prescott had to throw the ball 45, 50 times. I don't think they ultimately want to play like that. But, I think Dak Prescott has been a quarterback that's improved incrementally each and every season he's been in the league. I think that there will always be some questions, and I've talked to coaches about this, about his consistent ball placement. He'll miss a few throws here and there. But I think when you look at his toughness, his competitiveness, his ability to make plays with his legs at times, and again, he's not a big-time runner. He's not necessarily going to run for 50 yards or 60 yards like a Lamar Jackson for a touchdown, but he certainly can do that, and I think that's a part of his game. But I think he's gotten incrementally better each and every season, and this is a team, as you guys know, that has weapons. They've got 3 quality wideouts. So given that, I would expect them to be in a lot of 11 personnel with 3 wide receivers. And they have Amari Cooper and CeeDee Lamb, and those are 2 wide receivers that can move around quite a bit within your formation. Now, Michael Gallup in his first 2 years has predominantly been their boundary X, meaning he lines up as the single receiver to the short side of the field. We'll see if they continue to do that, because really, I think all 3 receivers can fill that role. So I think they'll be very versatile with their formations, but I think you'll see them as a 3 wide receiver team predominantly.
Greg, let's get back to Dak Prescott. This is a guy that no one's studying him more than you have, so you're the perfect guy to talk to about him, because you talked about how good of a start he got off before his injury. Now, I remember for that 16 draft, there were a lot of people, and this probably plays into why he was the 4th round pick, not a 2nd or 3rd. that had an issue with him because he's more of a see it and throw it quarterback like Justin Herbert. How has your opinion of him evolved from his college days from Mississippi State to what he's become as a professional?
Well, I think the other concern, Adam, too, was the ball placement.
Yeah.
I think that he was inconsistent with his ball placement. It wasn't precise as you'd like it to be. And I think he's improved somewhat in that area. I think he'll miss a few here and there. And there are times on routes where the receiver is moving, where his ball placement won't quite be as precise as it needs to be. And as we know, run after catch is more a function of the quarterback than it is of the wide receiver. So I think that those were concerns. I think he's improved in those areas. Every once in a while, it'll crop up with a poor throw, but all quarterbacks at times make poor throws. But I think there's a toughness to his game. I think that he'll stand and deliver the football. I tend to be a tape guy, but I have talked to a lot of people. And one thing about Dak Prescott, I think that really stands out when you talk to people is the fact that he plays 4 quarters, that he's mentally tough, he's physically tough, that he stays the same throughout the game. And this is a team with a lot of weapons. We haven't even talked about the run game. Obviously, Ezekiel Elliott last year did not look exactly like the Ezekiel Elliott of previous years. We don't know if that was COVID-based or not, so we really can't answer that. But he's certainly a quality back. They can run the ball. But I think this is a team that can make explosive plays in the pass game, and that's what offensive coordinators look to do in this league. It's about explosive plays in the pass game.
Yeah, how would you, if we were to talk about just their offensive scheme under their coordinator, who was an Eagles head coaching candidate and has received a lot of acclaim around the league, how would you describe the offense run by Kellen
Moore?
Kellen Moore, thank you.
I think it's pretty versatile. I mean, this is a team that attacks at all levels. I think that you see the intermediate passing game, the vertical passing game. It's a pretty complete passing game. And I think they have the receivers that can execute it. The question will be their offensive line. They do have good players. Tyron Smith has been hurt a lot, but when healthy, he's a very good left tackle. Zach Martin is their right guard. Lyle Collins is their right tackle. He's a solid player when healthy. Mm-hmm. So I think they expect their O-line to be significantly improved from a year ago. But this is an offense that can work all 3 levels. They're very formation multiple. One of the things, keep this in mind. The Cowboys like to play fast. They ran a ton of plays with Prescott last year when he was playing. And when you play fast and you use a lot of personnel, you really challenge the defense, because one thing that defensive coaches, and they always have someone up in the box looking at this, looking to see who the offensive personnel is so that you can put in the appropriate defensive personnel. And when you constantly change offensive personnel and you play fast, it puts a tremendous burden on the defense to have to respond to that. It's something the Saints have always done exceptionally well with Sean Payton and Drew Brees. And I think Prescott, now going into his 5th year, working with Kellen Moore. Is this Kellen Moore's 2nd or 3rd year, Adam?
I think it's
his third year, right?
Yeah, 3rd year.
3rd, yeah. So, you get more and more comfortable doing that. And I think they put a tremendous amount of pressure on defenses with the fact that they play fast and they can mix and match their personnel pretty effectively.
All right, Greg. So let's go to the defense. They've got a new scheme under Dan Quinn. No question. They've had an interesting offseason. They've had a lot of talent. So
yep.
With his particular scheme, Greg, let's get into what it looks like from you've seen his scheme, his version of Seattle's. Yeah. Let's talk about the personnel, Greg, how it'll fit in and what kind of defense Dan brings in.
One thing you have to keep in mind, everybody thinks of Dan Quinn from his days in Seattle. And, those days he had the Legion of Boom. And they played a lot of cover 3 because they could. Cam Chancellor was terrific as a box safety. He's changed a bit. Now, obviously, it didn't work out in Atlanta, and his defense wasn't very good. But as you watch Dan Quinn evolve over time, you saw a lot more man coverage, and you saw a lot more pressure. So, again, we don't know exactly what he'll do, but he's basically a 4-3 guy. That's what their front will be. They focused all their attention in the draft on defense because their defense was not very good last year. We know Micah Parsons will start. Kelvin Joseph was their 2nd-round pick out of Kentucky. He was an LSU transfer. He had 1st-round talent. he just had issues. He was kicked out of LSU. From what I was told, he was asked toward the end of the year that it would be better for him if he didn't play the last couple of games. So we know that he's got some issues, but he's a really talented corner. And then they continue to draft defensive players as you got into rounds 3. They had 3 draft picks. They were all on defense. So they are really looking to improve their defense. And, Parsons is a special player. They'll start at linebacker. He can also rush the quarterback. There were a lot of schools when he came out of high school that saw him as a D end, which he was in high school. He rushed the quarterback. So I'm very curious to see how Dan Quinn goes about playing, because he can do any number of things. We've seen him in the past when he had great talent, play pretty straightforward with a 4-man rush and cover 3. We've seen him expand and evolve where he more pressure, more cover 1, more man coverage. So I don't know exactly how he'll go about doing this. They've got some pretty good players. If Randy Gregory can stay on the field, he's a very talented guy.
Absolutely. Greg, I did want to ask you one more thing on Dak, and then we'll get back to the defense, because it relates to the Eagles and what they're going to do this year. They're going to be a different defense. That we've talked about it all. Lot more disguise, some more pre-snap movement. When you look at Dak throughout his career, how does he handle defenses like that aren't maybe as predictable or more multiple in what they do up front? Is he a good processor? Does he see it before it happens type guy? Where is he mentally when he's facing some of the more difficult or disguised coverages?
I think he's gotten better with that. And I think that one thing that the Cowboys will do is they'll try to be proactive in that regard so that they can force the defense's hand before the snap, because they'll use motion. They'll use a lot of different formations. Look, all defenses, now the game has evolved. More teams use motion on offense. More teams on defense disguise. It becomes cyclical. When you see disguise, it's not something now you go, oh my God, they're disguising their defense. More and more teams do this. And I think offenses become more prepared for it. And there are always keys. There's always indicators. Prescott, from what I understand, is one of those guys that studies hard. He's not a guy who's, late and out early. He studies hard. But I think the Cowboys will be very proactive with their use of motion in particular to help define things as much as they can for Dak Prescott before the snap of the ball and try to limit a lot of what defenses can do.
Greg, I want to follow up on the offense for a second here. You add Fehoko, who's a big receiver from the draft.
Yeah.
Wilson, Noah Brown's back, and Blake Jarwin come back from the ACL. Dalton Schultz did a good job filling in. When you look at the landscape of the league, because you watch every team, how deep is this offense in terms of talent?
It's really deep. I mean, Cedric Wilson has played well for the Cowboys. Obviously he's not a starter unless someone gets hurt, but when he's played well. Fajoko's an intriguing guy. He came out of Stanford. He's big. He can run. Watching his tape coming out of Stanford, I quite honestly thought of Chase Claypool at times. He's big and he can run. Now he was a 5th-round pick, and Claypool, I believe, was a 2nd-round pick. So he certainly wasn't quite seen that way. But I'm just talking about the physical traits. They're similar. So they certainly have a lot to work with on the outside. Blake Jarwin is back, but as you said, Adam Schultz came in and functioned well. So, this is a team with a lot of weapons, and I think they'll be aggressive. Look, I think Zeke will get his carries, but I think this will be a passing team more than a running team.
How do you see the interior of that offensive line now? Obviously, no more Travis Frederick. I think the kid from Wisconsin is now going to be there. I can't pronounce his last name. Biadash. Okay, right. Connor Williams, left guard, I would imagine, and at right guard, they will have still Zach Martin. How has Zach Martin's play looked to you over the last year and a half, because he's had to deal with injuries?
Yeah. Well, they didn't address their O-line, so they feel comfortable that if everybody's healthy, that they're good. So I think that, they feel that Biadash will be a solid center. Other than that, Connor Williams has struggled at times throughout his career. He was a 2nd-round pick in 2018. He was a tackle in college. They moved him to guard. There are times he struggles. It's just the tape tells you that. But he's their left guard. I think they feel really good about their 2 tackles if they're healthy. Their concerns have always been health. If they can play with these 5, Geoff, for 16 games, and that might be a stretch, they actually have a very good sort of journeyman tackle that they signed in Ty Nsekhe. Been with Buffalo. He's been with Washington. He's a very good backup tackle who can play both left tackle and right tackle and give you quality snaps and quality games. But they didn't, the only other player that they took was a kid named Josh Ball out of Marshall, who was actually a big-time recruit. I believe he went to Florida State, got kicked out, but he's a very talented kid. A lot of people thought that just ability-wise, he was more like a second-round player, but he's had some issues, personal issues, but he's there. So, if this O-line can stay healthy, and that's a big if, I think they feel really good about this offense.
Download the top-rated DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code ITB when you sign up to turn $1 into $100 in free credits. That's $1 into $100 in free credits when you sign up using the promo code ITB on the top-rated DraftKings Sportsbook app.
It's funny, Greg, as you broke this down on both sides of the football, it certainly seems like the offense is, I'm not going to say going to carry the defense, because you did mention there's some talent on defense. To me right now, this looks like the best team in the NFC East. I mean, they're loaded, right, Greg, on both sides of the football?
They're going to score. I mean, there's no question. Look, assuming Prescott's healthy and everything we hear is that he's going to be fine, they're going to score points. The question to me is Dan Quinn and the defense, because one of the things is when you score a lot and they'll make explosive plays, is your defense will end up playing more snaps. And I'm really curious how Mike McCarthy, the head coach, and Kellen Moore see their offense, especially if they get ahead in games. Do they keep the pedal to the metal, which is fine, but look, we know in this league, no one scores 45 every week. That doesn't happen. So will they keep the pedal to the metal? Will they at times try to tempo it a little bit and wait and see how their defense is playing? We don't know the answer to these questions, but their defense has a lot of young players. It's easy to say Micah Parsons is a great prospect, or as I said, Kelvin Joseph had first-round talent, but these guys have not played in the NFL yet. So we just don't know the answer to how all this comes together defensively.
It does feel like the Dallas offense versus the Washington defense, and we'll get into Washington on Thursday, is going to kind of be the highlight of the NFC. Those 2 games are going to be everyone's going to talk about the Dallas offense versus the Washington defense. Right. That's going to be the highlight of it.
Yeah, and we'll get to Washington's defense, but they certainly have a lot of talent on that defense.
Right. Continuing with the defense of Dallas, as we kind of focus on areas, let's bring up the defensive line a little bit. DeMarcus Lawrence still there. He's been kind of the Eagles have been able to contain him in some games, and then when they've had injuries, they've struggled with him. But they also have some younger names, right? Tristan Hill and Nevin Gallimore.
Neville Gallimore.
Nevin Gallimore.
Third-round pick out of Oklahoma last year. Liked his tape coming out of college. I think they expect him to be a big factor. They drafted the kid from UCLA, who, believe it or not, he was one of the few guys in the top 90 I did not get to see. So
Digizua, right.
Yeah, I can't speak to him.
Gotcha.
They drafted Chauncey Goldston of Iowa in the 3rd round, a player I did not love on tape. I'll be the first to admit that. I didn't love his tape, but they obviously did. They drafted him in the 3rd round. So, I think Lawrence and Gregory, to me, are sort of the 2 key guys, because they can both be really good disruptive players. Lawrence has shown that. Gregory's shown flashes, just hasn't been on the field enough.
Right. How would you compare, or I'm sorry, I just want to follow up, how you would compare what you expect from the D-line scheme under Dan Quinn, and how that might differ from what they've had in the past few years? I mean, obviously they only have 1 year of Mike Nolan, and before that they had Rod Marinelli, who's one of the best. I always think of a Marinelli scheme. I mean, they would stunt, they would do everything very actively up front. But what do you know about Dan Quinn and his up front scheme?
Well, he's predominantly a 4-man D-line. The big question to me is when they're in their base, and again, how often teams are in their base is a function of specific games, is what they're going to do with Gregory. some people think Gregory can line up and play, in this particular defense, because very often, see, in a Dan Quinn defense, very often you have a strong side linebacker on the line of scrimmage.
Mm-hmm.
So in this defense, does Gregory end up being, in their base, I'm talking, is Gregory theoretically a linebacker and stand up just on the line of scrimmage? Because he's got that kind of build. He's long, he's sinewy, he's wiry, he's an athlete. Gregory's an athlete. So will he be the guy who is on the line of scrimmage when they're in their base defense? I think when they go sub, both Gregory and Lawrence, we saw this last year, even though Quinn wasn't there, but both Gregory and Lawrence at times lined up inside at 3 technique D tackle. And I think both guys can move around and do that. I'm curious what group they'll have with their front when they're in their sub. We know Lawrence and Gregory will be there. Will Parsons end up being a rusher? Will it be Dorrance Armstrong, who's been there, who's got some length to him as well? I think when they go to their sub front, there's some questions.
That's where I was actually going to get to as we kind of summarize the defense, because to me, the D line, now that they've added, as you mentioned, Joseph Diggs returns, who I know they like, Jordan Lewis, Anthony Brown's still there. KZ comes over because he knows Dan Quinn. To me, it looks like, Greg, the defense, at least on paper, the D line is the one where I think they have the most questions. Would that be fair if you look at it?
They've got some questions because, they have new players, and there's always questions when you have new players.
Sure.
Although the secondary as well. Diggs is going to start at one corner. We know that. Joseph was drafted in the 2nd round to start at the other corner. Whether he can do that and do it well as a rookie, Adam, that remains to be seen. I loved his talent. He's got NFL talent, but he's a rookie. He hasn't played in the NFL yet. So they do have some question marks on their defense for sure. And it was not a very good defense a year ago.
No.
That's why Mike Nolan's not there.
Right. You mentioned Trevon Diggs, who's the brother, little brother of Stephon Diggs. Yep. If you, and you also talked earlier in the show about how their defense was epically awful in the first few weeks of the season last year, while the offense was exploding with Dak. I remember if you looked at some of their lowlights from the first 2, 3, 4 weeks of the season, Trayvon Grimes was going to be there. He had some struggles against McLaurin. He had some struggles against others. But I feel like he improved over the second half of the season. Greg, did you see Trayvon Grimes make a jump from?
Yeah, I thought he did.
Trayvon Diggs make a jump from the early part of the season.
He got hurt and then he came back, and I thought he played better. And he's a certain kind of corner. He's a big, physical, competitive corner. Now he can run, but those big corners like that tend not to be quite as smooth with their change of direction and transition skills, often as smaller corners. But I think Diggs at his best is a physical, competitive, man-to-man press corner. He will tackle, he will hit, he's aggressive. And I think that's what you hope you get from Diggs. You'd like to line him up and play man. I think he's got the kind of skill set where in an ideal world, you would feel good with him being your boundary corner, because he can line up when there's less space and he can be physical with wide receivers.
One more question, Greg, I wanted to discuss, because a lot of people are questioning whether Jalen Smith is still the same player. What did you see from Jalen Smith last season?
I don't think his year last year was as good as the year before, quite honestly. But he's a talented guy. He can run. He's big. People kind of forget that he's about 240, 245 pounds. He's a big guy. So, my guess is he'll come back and be better this year. Now the question is, what's Van Der Esch's situation?
Right.
Because if they're going to see Gregory as more of a on-the-ball linebacker in their base, is Van Der Esch the odd man out? Is it Parsons, Smith, and Gregory? And we don't, these are questions that we have to wait for training camp to happen. And, we don't know the answer. Obviously, Van Der Esch had, I think it was a neck injury, was it, Adam?
Yeah, he's had neck issues, unfortunately.
Yeah, I know there are concerns about how long he can play with that injury. So we can't answer that. I thought Van Der Esch at his best was a really good player. That's an open question right now.
Hold that thought. I want to ask you a little bit more about the linebackers and their nickel situation. First, I want to remind everybody to go check out our friends at phlsportsnation.com, enhancing the fans' experience with all the great coverage that they provide of their Philadelphia sports teams. Make sure you check them out on Twitter at PHL Sports Nation, or go to the website, phlsportsnation.com. We'll pause real quick for another word from our great sponsors, including our friends at Sky Motor Cars. Okay, Greg, getting back to the linebacker situation, it feels like Jalen Smith has, with Leighton Vander Esch, we know the injuries played a role in whatever he was going through last year. But with Jalen Smith, did his play regress, or are they attacking him differently? Because he did not seem to have the kind of season that he had either a year or two prior when he got the extension. What did you see from Jalen Smith's ability?
Yeah, like I said, I don't think he was as good last year, but, he was used in different ways. I mean, he was used as a pass rusher a lot. You have to decide now, I guess, how you want to use him best. And, what's the best way to do that? And when a new coach comes in, more often than not, they sort of start from scratch. If Quinn will coach what he knows. And he'll, like I said, he added to it when he was in Atlanta with more pressure, more man. But more often than not, in his system, his linebackers are stacked players. And that's what Smith, I think, is really good at. He's a stacked player. He can run. He can cover a lot of ground. I would expect him to be better this year within this system. The big question becomes their sub packages is who's going to play. It wouldn't surprise me if Parsons, depending on training camp, obviously, if he's more of a pass rusher, perhaps in their system. Again, you can line up in a lot of different ways, but that would not surprise me.
Well, I got to tell you guys, hearing Greg break this team down, they're loaded with talent, and there's a lot that they can do. But as Greg said, they've drafted a lot of players. They've had a ton of players this offseason. So we'll see how Geoff, how it all kind of works its way through training camp in the preseason.
They could be really good on offense. They could be really good on offense.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I wonder from an offensive standpoint for the Eagles on how they go about attacking this kind of a team that has some pretty good weapons up front. Yet to see at the cornerback spot, although we did talk about Diggs improving, but certainly it's safety. I mean, it's Reggie Robinson and Donovan Wilson. I mean, I don't know if that's going to scare.
No, it won't. People. And I think Wilson is much more of a line of scrimmage player, box player, good blitzer. He's almost a true strong safety type.
Right. So you feel like maybe the opportunity for the Eagles, without knowing right now how some of their wide receivers are going to perform, but knowing that Goddard has been a good weapon for them and has played well against the Cowboys in the past, and Miles Sanders and maybe a Gainwell or someone who can catch the ball out of the backfield. You might want to try to hit the Cowboys there where it hurts at that safety spot if you can get the middle of the field going.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the Cowboys defense is a pretty significant work in progress because you have a new coordinator and you have a lot of new talent and old talent that might be in different positions. So that, to me, that's a work in progress, which raises the question, which we spoke about earlier, just to finish up on the Cowboys, is to how they choose to play offense, because I think their passing game could be really explosive. We saw that a year ago before Dak got hurt. And so the question becomes, do they play that way throughout every game, or does there come a point in a game perhaps where they sort of say, and this is on the head coach more than anybody, do they say, hey, we're up, it's third quarter, we're up 31-14 or 31-17. Do we need to sort of slow it down a little and not put so much pressure on our defense?
Absolutely. All right. Also, the unanswered question is how Dak comes back from that injury, if there's any hesitation or anything. That was a pretty gruesome injury that he did suffer. So we'll have to – that's a question that we'll talk about more as we get closer to the season and we get to see. But obviously Cowboys, big offense. As Greg said, question mark on defense. And that will wrap it up for the Dallas. The next podcast on Thursday morning, 6 a.m., we will talk about Washington. And it seems like the conversation will be completely different. We'll be raving about the defense and then talking about the offense perhaps being a work in progress. So we look forward to having Greg back on and getting his insight and tape breakdown on that. So thanks to everybody for watching. Thanks to all our sponsors. Of course, thanks to our producer, Hunter Brody. Check out his work on his YouTube channel, Sports Talk with Broads. You can find him on Twitter at Broads81 and his website, broadsmedia.com. And as always, we thank you for flying with us inside the bird.